This episode of the Tony Robbins podcast is brought to you by Tony Robbins Results Coaching. Are you ready to experience an extraordinary quality of life? Or maybe you're already doing well, but you know you can take your life to a whole new level. To do that, you have to set yourself up to win. You need a process, a way to consistently grow and produce the results that you need. That's what a Tony Robbins Results Coach can do for you. Whatever area in your life you want to change, your relationship, your health, your career, or your business, coaching is one of the most valuable tools you can have. It's an investment in yourself, and it can yield some of the highest returns. Tony Robbins Results Coaches are hand-selected and trained by the master of coaching, Tony Robbins himself, to have the skills that will empower you with supreme focus, powerful insight, and the accountability needed to achieve everything you've ever dreamed. To help you get started, Tony is offering podcast listeners a free results coaching strategy session with one of his top coaches. It's a $200 value, and you're getting it for free. Visit TonyRobbins.com/results. Schedule that free session today.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Tony Robbins podcast. This is Tony Robbins. I'm here with my co-host, Mary Buckeye.
Here we go, Tone. I'm excited for this one.
I am too, and I think you're going to be as well. This is a very special podcast. I might get emotional in this piece because this man was a true mentor to me and to so many men that I respect and love. Everyone's looking for the competitive edge in life. Like, how do we compete? How do we, in a world that's so competitive, how do we win? How do we be the best that we can possibly be for ourselves, for our businesses, for our lives, for our families? And probably the greatest coach, certainly one of the greatest coaches alive that ever lived, I should say, and the greatest coach in the history of college basketball, hands down, is Coach John Wooden. Here's a man who, in a 29-year career, check this out, won 664 games and lost only 162. I'll do the math for you. That means he won 80.4% of the time over 3 decades in a sport where, if you can imagine, you're having a new set of players every year. It's not like, you're part of, let's say the old Chicago Bulls and you've got Michael Jordan every year, that same team. You lose those best players every 3-4 years. So, but the most powerful thing is in his last 12 years of coaching, he won 10 NCAA national championships, something no one has done in history, and most people believe never will happen again in history. But the most amazing thing about this human being is he didn't just build a basketball dynasty. He was a molder of character, a molder of emotion, a molder of men.
Some great men came out of that UCLA program. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar won 3 titles with Coach Wooden. Reggie Miller, Bill Walton, Kevin Love, Steve Alford, all played under Wooden.
Yeah, and Kareem is a friend of mine. He actually is writing a book on his life, so you should watch for it when it comes out. And he always talked about how Coach always taught us self-discipline, but the most powerful part of him is he was always his own best example. And I think if you want to know what made Coach Wooden go, is this man lived everything he taught. He walked his talk, and that's why he was able to influence these young men who were pretty spirited in those days.
That's right. Back in my days at ESPN, before I found you, Tone, I used to love some of my favorite stories to read by some of the other columnists and writers were always about John Wooden. All the greats had these stories of just like what a character he was on the golf course, in the practice arena, how he would tell guys how to tie their shoelaces, their socks, like every single detail. Just such a beautiful man, so beloved.
When people would go out and make like what would be considered a 3-point shot today, in those days, he'd say, show me 100, of these free throws, or he'd say, show me 100 layups in a row. His entire thing was, it was all about execution. He didn't care how cute it was or how great a shot from a distance. He wanted to make sure that you never missed the details. And part of that came from his upbringing. I mean, he taught common sense, which of course is not too common anymore, unfortunately, because we all blow it off. But what you'll learn is he shared that his father gave him a 7-point creed right before when he was graduating from grammar school. And he said, if you do these 7 things, your life will be extraordinarily fulfilling, alive, and successful. And he said, first, you have to be true to yourself. Second, make each day your masterpiece. Third, help others. 4th, drink deeply from good books, especially the Bible. 5, make friendship a fine art. 6, build a shelter against a rainy day. And 7, pray for guidance and give thanks for blessings every day. And that seems so simple. But this man in the 1930s was practicing this discipline, and it guided every decision he made in his life. He kept it on a card that his dad had given him, literally from grammar school, and it guided his whole life. When I interviewed him, he pulled it out of his wallet and showed it to me. That, along with, of course, his pyramid of success, which was extraordinary. But one of the things that I love most about him is this man was not just quotes. Everything he completely lived. Share a few of your favorite.
I loved it. I just recently, first of all, after you listen to this Power Talk, you got to check out his TED Talk too.
I know, I didn't even know we had a TED Talk. It's
Just
amazing.
as cute as you would imagine. He's as true as he could possibly be. My favorite quote, I love to remind Big Tone of this, of course, is John Wooden said, "Be quick, but don't hurry." I like to just remind Tony Robbins of that once in a while. I think John Wooden would be proud.
Yes, he definitely had a different tempo for things. What are some other ones that have stood out for you, Mary?
Just the way, his focus on character, and of course, I'm such a romantic, his love affair with his dear Nell.
Oh my God.
Passed.
You're going to start making me cry on this one.
Yeah.
He, every month from the time she passed, and he lived 25 years past her lifespan, he wrote her a love letter. And when I was at his home, he took me in and showed me that he never sleeps on her side of the bed. And there, tied with this beautiful ribbon around it, was this stack of all these love letters he wrote her each month. It was you couldn't have a dry eye. I don't care how hard you are. I'm a softie anyway, but such a beautiful man. But also just, as you said, his focus was his quote was always be more concerned with your character than your reputation. Because his whole thing was, you got to focus on things you can control. You can't control what people think of you, but you can control who you are. And it was more important for him how these men turned out as human beings than it ever was even just how they performed. And, a lot of people out there ask me about coaching, and he had a great quote. He said, "A coach is someone who can give correction without causing resentment." Whenever I see somebody, a parent or a business coach or a CEO, and they're not effective, it's because the state in which they coach people makes people feel judged. And I've always said to people, you can't influence someone if you're judging them. But if you really care, it's really hard to not be able to reach someone if you're consistently caring, not you're caring today. And then, I think the only other thing I'd mention is that, because I want to get you right into the podcast pretty quick here, is that his whole mindset was talent was God-given, so be humble. That fame is man-given, so you better be grateful because it can be taken away so quick. And conceit is self-given, so you better be careful. I think his definition of success was the thing that impacted me most. I've shared it with so many people. I've coached billionaires, some of the top financial traders in the world over the years. Whenever they've gotten a tough space, I've always reminded them, you're not defined by your moment, by a moment. It's what you are consistently like. And Coach Wooden, I remember when I was talking to him, I don't know which interview it was, but it was early on, maybe even in the very first interview. I don't know if it made it in. But when I asked him what would be the greatest, most successful team, the team he was most proud of, and I assumed it would be like Kareem's team, right? 3 championships, and they're one of the greatest. They won 88 games in a row. I mean, how do you do that, right? Over multiple years. And he didn't pick that team. You'll hear it. I think it's on the podcast here on the end. I think you'll hear he names a team I'd never heard of. And I said, why would you pick them? They didn't perform at the highest level. He said, because they were the team that maximized their potential more than any other. They did the most they humanly could with who they were. And his definition was really simple. He always told people, and I've used this in my own life, and I hope you'll use it in yours, and you'll hear it echoed from him in the podcast, but it was this idea that you can't control whether you're going to win or lose. And there's only one way you know whether you win or lose, and that is by measuring yourself. Did you give every ounce of yourself, every moment you're on that court? And he said, that you can control. And he said, if every moment on that court you gave every ounce of your soul, and I'm emotionally even thinking about it because it's been my life motto, then you will always know that you won because you gave everything. Because what we give is what we keep. And what we fail to give is the only thing that we lose in this life. And his mindset was, if you give everything, every moment on the court, and we all do that together, then most of the time you're going to win. You're going to have the highest score. But if you don't, there are times when someone will get lucky or a bad call or whatever it is. You can lose the game, but you've not lost the game of life because that's all it's about. So I'm choked up by this, man. Even now, 30 years later, I hope you'll be as touched as him. I know you will as well. And if you want to know how to have the edge in life as a parent, as a friend, as a business person, as an athlete, you're about to learn from the best coach that ever lived. My dear friend, and the friend of so many, the one that led and mentored so many, the great coach from UCLA, Coach John Wooden. Let's join him now.
And now we'll go back to 29-year-old Tony Robbins to hear his power talk with the man of principle, the great Coach John Wooden, who would be 106 on October 14th, 2016.
Hi, this is Tony Robbins. Welcome to the interview portion of Power Talk. And I'm especially excited and privileged today to be able to sit across the room from a legend, a man who has continually touched people's minds and hearts and made sports history. And that is none other than Coach John Wooden. Coach, I really want to thank you for letting me come here to your home to visit with you.
Thank you, Tony. I consider it a privilege to have the opportunity to chat with you for a while.
Well, thank you, sir. Coach Wooden was a man who, in his 27 years as a coach at UCLA, produced a level of basketball quality and quality people, I think, and I think as a teacher that's really what he pursued, that has been unmatched. In his last 12 years with UCLA, he won 10 national NCAA championships, unheard of. A quote from a gentleman named Jim Murray, who's the LA Times famous sports writer, said that what Knute Rockne was to football and what Connie Mack was to baseball and what Wilbur and Orville Wright were to flying, John Wooden was to basketball. Those are pretty big comments to make about a legend like yourself, and I know you don't see yourself that way because you're so humble and you come from a different place, but maybe you can tell us, where did all this start?
I think it started in my early days when I was raised on a farm in southern Indiana, south central Indiana, I should say. And I think primarily from my father and mother and perhaps a grade school principal. I went to a small three-room grade school, but the principal had a remarkable effect on me, which you don't realize at the time, but later on.
Yes.
And my father, too, who with only a high school education, I think he's probably as wise a man as I've ever come across. Tremendous common sense. And one of the things that he tried to get across to me and my three brothers, which I didn't appreciate probably at the time, was that you should never try to be better than someone else. And if he stopped there, it would leave you, I think, wondering, but he didn't stop there. He said, but you should never cease to try to be the very best that you could be.
Yes.
And when you think about that, and later on it came back to me and had a lot to do with my own definition of success, which I coined in 1934, that when you get involved too much in the things over which you have no control, it's obviously going to adversely affect the things over which you have control. And I think that came back to me later, and the things that we did on the farm, reading at night, and I think probably it's the reason of my enjoyment for poetry. There wasn't television or radio or things, but Dad would read to us at night, and I think it's perhaps while he didn't have the financial means to help any of us go to college, I think probably he's the primary reason that I and my three brothers all graduated from college, all became teachers.
Wow. I know he gave you a creed to live by at some point. Maybe you could share a little bit about that. Is it true also that you still carry it with you?
Yes, I do. Tony, when I graduated from this grade school, they sort of made a thing out of graduating from grade school. I'd say that we put on our best overalls. And
All three of you, huh?
Yeah. And he gave me this creed and a $2 bill, an old $2 bill, very large at that particular time. And I would like to say I still have it, but I didn't give it to my son, so he would have it.
Oh, that's nice.
But he gave me that $2 bill and said, as long as you keep this, you'll never be broke. And then he gave me a 7-point creed, and he just very simply said, son, try to live up to this. And the points were something like this: be true to yourself and help others, and make each day your masterpiece, and drink deeply from good books, especially the Bible, and build a shelter against a rainy day, and make friendship a fine art, and give thanks for your blessings, and pray for guidance every day.
Wow. And it sounds like that's been a major focus throughout your whole life.
I wouldn't try to say I've lived up to it, Tony, but I would. I've tried.
You've done a pretty darn good job. From every person that I've talked to who's ever worked or played for you, they say you really live by that creed and that you really walk your talk, Coach. I know you had some experiences early on that shaped some of your values. I remember reading, I think, in your book where you shared that at one point, I guess, one of your brothers threw manure on you, and you had a unique reaction to that, and so did your father, and I guess it shaped some of your future values. Would you share that with us?
Well, we were cleaning out adjoining stalls in the barn, and my brother threw a pitchfork of manure over on me and hit me, and I was very, very mad, of course, and I went after him, not with the pitchfork, but he was 3 years older than I. I couldn't do much good against him at that time, but I didn't think about that at the time, and I went after him, but in doing so, I called him a name. I'm ashamed about it, but I did, and my father overheard, and he gave me about the only real spanking of that type, I think, that he ever did. But I knew I had it coming, and you don't, when you know you deserve something, even if it's bad, you can accept it much better than the things that you feel you don't deserve.
Yes.
But I must say that he also gave my older brother probably one just as hard or harder.
And what did you learn from that experience?
Well, to control your temper, for one thing, and as far as using profanity. I don't believe since that time, no player, no friend, no official has ever heard me use profanity.
Yes.
And I probably had something to do with it.
I understand you also, one of your major philosophies in life is that you don't believe in allowing people to go through emotional peaks, at least on the basketball court, and that you wanted people to be prepared and be able to enjoy their successes in a unique and balanced way. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
My players would probably tell you that they never heard me mention winning. I don't think scores indicate that you won or lost. I wanted no excessive jubilation because you outscored somebody in a game, or excessive dejection if you were outscored. I wanted them each and every day to just do the best they could to improve themselves, and not let a day go by with doing that, because that's a day lost that you can never recover. And I never wanted and tried to get these ideas across. And you can't just tell them once and think they have it. The last of our laws of learning is repetition, and I would repeat them, but maybe not in the exact words, but getting the idea across day after day. For example, I would say that after a game, if you met someone that didn't know the outcome of the game, I hope they wouldn't be able to tell by your actions. As I say, I want no excessive jubilation or excessive dejection. Feel good when you've prepared yourself, and you're the only one that really knows. You can fool a coach and you can fool everybody but yourself. Know that you have prepared yourself to perform near your own particular level of competency. It may be, but the other fellow's level of competence is just better than yours, and there's nothing to be ashamed about in that. But there is something to be ashamed when you know that you didn't prepare yourself properly when you had the opportunity. So that was my idea, and I felt that would have greater effect on the outcome of games than if I was stressing in some other way, trying to outscore opponents.
That whole philosophy of really improving yourself versus comparing yourself to the other guy affected your scouting as well. I guess you really didn't scout teams to find out how they played. You wanted to develop a plan that would work against anyone.
That was my philosophy. It's been said that I never scouted an opponent, and that isn't true, Tony, but I probably scouted less than any other coach, certainly far less than anyone that I've ever known. Yes, I wanted to concentrate on what we could do and try to prepare yourself. Now, I needed to know something about the opponent, but I could read and I could hear about others, and I would know the coach, and I would know the coach for whom he probably played, and I would know their general style, and I'd know whether they used a zone defense and what type of zone. I'd know whether they pressed. I'd know who their better scorers were, and I'd know from the type of offense they use how that comes about, along with, of course, their own individual ability. So I didn't want to talk about those things too much. I'm just trying to prepare my team in our practices against any eventuality.
And preparation was the foundation of everything you taught. How did you really prepare your teams for games?
By trying to get them to execute near their own ability level. taking each game. It's an old trite statement that you play them one game at a time, but it's equally true. And if you start looking ahead, then you will not perform as you're capable of performing. Or if you dwell in the past because you did real well in the past, that's not going to have anything to do with how you're going to perform the next time. So you've got to prepare individually for each and everyone, and not let the what's happened before or what's likely to happen in the future affect you, knowing that the only real way that you can affect the future is by what you do at the present, and what's happened in the past cannot. Now, I wanted them to have respect for every team we played, regardless of how they had done prior to that. Don't fear them, and don't give them no respect. You must respect everyone, and just make the effort to execute near your own ability level.
I know that repetition was a major part of how you train people. As you said, it's one of the laws of learning. I think a lot of people in life avoid repetition. They think it's boring. What is your reaction to people who think repetition and hearing the same things over and over again is boring?
Yes, I think it's been said that consistency is the last refuge of the unimaginative. But I feel that that's the way habits are formed, is through a consistent repetition. And now I must change my drills a little bit, still teaching the same thing. And I might, as time goes by, change the amount of time that I allow for certain drills. Some groups will pick up a little quicker than others. You have to constantly be analyzing those under your supervision. If you're not, and don't make it fun, Bill Walton recently on an interview said one thing about Coach Wooden, he made practices fun. Even though we did the same things in many cases every day, there would be little changes, and he made them fun. Well, I never wanted them to feel it was a chore, but I did want them to feel that during that hour and a half to 2 hours we're going to spend on the basketball floor, that's where I wanted their minds 100%. I don't want them thinking about other things, and if there are people up in the stands watching them, I don't want you performing for them. You're just working to improve yourself. Now, but as soon as practice is over, you're not a basketball player. No, you're a student at UCLA, and that must be your main consideration, because that's why you're here.
I know that a lot of these values were installed in you by some of your coaches. I know at one time you were offered the opportunity to go play for the Celtics and go barnstorming across America for, what was it, around $5,000 in those days, when $800 a year was a huge sum of money? Tell me about that.
The old pro league broke up the year I graduated, and they were forming a barnstorming group consisting largely of the old New York Celtics at that time, and the Cleveland Rosenblum Celtics is the name that they went under the new one. And they did offer me $5,000. Well, I took a job at $1,500, and where I taught 5 English classes a day as athletic director and coached football, basketball, baseball, and track. And I turned this down, but I went to my college coach, a man of extremely high principles, a very high principle man. And I told him about this, and, he said, that's a lot of money, isn't it? Yeah, well, it sure is, yes. And he said, is that what you came to Purdue for? I said, well, what do you mean, Mr. Lambert? And he said, to go into professional athletics of that sort, professional basketball? I said, no, I didn't. I came to get an education. He said, did you get one? I said, I think so. And he said, well, I think you ought to take advantage of it. But that's a decision that you have to make. You have to decide for yourself. But he was very wise in things like that. There are other things along that line that he did that probably subconsciously had an effect on me.
Tell me a little bit about Coach Wooden, the ball player. I know you're one of the only person that's ever been elected into the College Hall of Fame as both a player and a coach. What were you like as a player?
Well, I can only tell you what other people have said. I'm proud of the fact that I was been selected in the all-time high school basketball team in Indiana, and As a matter of fact, Oscar Robertson and I were selected as the starting guards on the all-time
Wow.
team and on the all-time college team from Indiana. And I'm proud of that, but the game has changed so much. And when I read and hear things that list me along, say, with either Oscar Robertson or one of those, I kind of chuckle because I know it isn't true. And but I'm happy that I was considered to be one of the better ones of my particular era. I enjoyed playing. I was considered one of the better defensive players, and I'm very proud of the fact that at my senior graduation that my coach had said that in spite of the fact that I'd just broken the Big Ten scoring record, that never entered my mind, that I was one of the most unselfish players that he ever had and the best defensive player that he ever had. But more than that, he said, what made that, I believe he's the best conditioned athlete for playing any sport that I've ever seen. Well, now, condition I worked on. I knew that's something over which I had control. I didn't have control over my height, and the Lord had given me quickness and speed, and I could, by proper execution and keeping balance, and balance is more than just physical balance. So many people think of it in those terms, but you can't have physical balance unless you're mentally and emotionally balanced. That must precede.
Yes.
It's like attaining condition. You can't attain the best condition unless your mental condition and moral conditioning precede it. But I know that today's players and the things, no, I don't compare with those at all. But I enjoyed playing and enjoyed being considered one of the better ones of my time.
How did you mentally prepare your teams, and how did you physically prepare them? I know, I remember you saying several times that your teams might meet teams that were more skilled, but they'd never meet teams that were better conditioned. And it seems like you used the same strategy that you used in your own life with your teams. But how did you prepare them mentally and physically?
Well, I would tell them that we must be in the best possible physical condition. We may not be able to be better than others because maybe the other fellows try and do the same thing. But we do have control of our own conditioning. We must make the effort, and it's a combined effort. I have a responsibility to devise drills, and I must study and analyze each one of you and have drills individual, and drills. Some drills will be good for all, and some drills will be good just for certain individuals. I must know how to apply these drills in practice. I must not continue them too long. I must know as the season progresses how they're going to change, and I know how I must devise new ones to prevent monotony and all of those things that I must do. But young men, you have a responsibility too. Your responsibility begins every day when practice ends until you return, because you can tear down more between practices than we can possibly build up during practices. And I know that many of you are probably thinking I'm speaking of immoral conduct, and certainly that isn't conducive to the best physical condition, but we must just practice moderation in all things. And if you practice moderation in your eating and rest habits and other things, then with my living up to my responsibilities, we'll come close to realizing the physical condition that we're capable of. We can't do it perfectly because no one can be perfect, but let's work toward that end. And I tried to get them to accept that, and I'd say, now, if this is going to pay dividends for us, we must put pressure on our opponent from the very beginning, and not just on defense, but on offense. We must keep pressure. We must try the fast break every time, but we mustn't end with a bad shot. But we must make them move to get back and make them aware of that. And if we are in better condition, before the end of a half, it'll begin to pay dividends, and before the game is over, it will pay dividends. Now, my problem was to sell that to the players. And,
when they were exhausted.
I tried to do it, but I didn't condition by running laps or running up and down stairs or doing push-ups or running penny cup games and things of that side. I did it through the individual fundamental drills. A shooting drill for us was a conditioning drill, the way I ran it. There was no resting in between, always working.
Well, move, move, move was I think the most famous phrase that most of your players say that you used over and over again. And they said that your practices, from what I understand, you would spend an hour designing a 90-minute practice that was literally to that level of precision. Did you do that regularly and consistently, and why?
Yes, I did. I think I learned that from high school and possibly from my teaching English classes. That I had to have a plan I'd have a lesson plan for every day. And when I first started teaching, I understood that. In teaching English classes, I didn't understand it the way I should have in teaching the various sports that I taught. But I learned that we must be prepared. Otherwise, we're going to waste an enormous amount of time. As a matter of fact, Tony, I'd say my years at UCLA, I probably spent 2 hours every morning with assistants. When I had assistants, I didn't always have. My last few years I did have, planning the practice session for that afternoon, which will never last over 2 hours, and probably most of the season will be only an hour and a half. But it's practice the full time. It isn't talking. I did very little. I'm talking while the drill's going on, talking to individuals. I did more individual coaching in that sense. Now, I don't have it now because I've given it to one of my friends in the coaching profession, but I could have given you every minute of every day of practice I ever had at UCLA. I kept it in a loose leaf notebook, and when we planned it, I would have it by the minute, and then I put that on. Some of my players call me the 3x5 man because I had our practices on a 3x5 card, which I would watch carefully. My managers had it, so they'd know that at this time they better have 2 balls at this basket and 2 balls there, and players would move quickly from one to another. And when I planned a day's practice, I looked back to see what we'd done on the corresponding day last year and the year before. Now, that took care of every practice that any player I had in which he had participated, because the freshmen weren't eligible. So otherwise, I'd have gone back 3 years. And after the day of practice is over, I sat down in the dressing room and wrote down some notes on the back of this 3x5 card about the practice. And then the next day, when I'm planning the practice the next day, I made little notations along the indenture, along this theme paper about certain things, that maybe this was 2 minutes too long, or I needed 2 more minutes, or things of that sort. And by reviewing back and thinking and analyzing all that, and then thinking in terms of what's coming up this weekend, if we got into the season where we're playing games and who we're playing and where we're playing and so on, and analyzing and taking all these things in consideration. But I enjoyed doing that, and I enjoyed teaching. And you may have heard me say, or heard of me being quoted as saying that Cervantes said, "The road is better than the inn."
Yes.
And I sort of equate that with practicing and the games. And I think it was Robert Louis Stevenson said, it's better to travel hopefully than to arrive.
Yes.
And that's about the same thing. And I really enjoyed it. And now, since my retirement, I've been asked so many times, do I miss it? I miss the practices and working with the players and the planning of the practices. And I don't miss the games or the tournaments or all the other falderall.
Well, the amount of precision that you've had in your instruction, I understand you kept statistics on the players even during practice, not just in games. Is that true?
Yes, I did. There are many things. Now, I didn't keep as many statistics, but there are certain things that I wanted to know. I wanted to see what the trends were. I wanted to know, and not depending completely on my memory.
Yes.
If you start depending completely on your memory, well, I don't have that type of memory.
Well, you've got 80 years to remember.
I did that, and certain things I want to see if maybe we were going too much to one side of the floor and then we weren't to the other. I want to see if we were getting an approximate equal number of shots when we got into our 5-on-5 work for each position on the floor. And some players will get more just because they're more gifted and can do more individually. But I wanted the vast majority of our shots, for example, on offense, to come from within the framework of our team, not an individual. I disliked one-on-one basketball and wanted it to come out of the team. But there are times when you do have the one-on-one. So I wanted to primarily check trends. That's why I kept certain statistics.
I know I've done quite a bit of research about the Japanese style of management, and one of the philosophies that actually the most of Japanese business is built on came from Dr. Edward Deming, who we talked about a little bit earlier. And his whole philosophy is based upon the idea of never-ending improvement, that every day you must improve something and that you have to measure it so that you know that that's really true. How do your philosophies dovetail with Deming's, or vice versa, maybe his with yours?
Well, certainly That's my belief too, that
Yes.
you never stand still. You're either moving upward a little bit or you're going the other way a little bit. We can't expect to go upward too quickly, but we can sure go down very quickly. The slide down can be in a hurry.
Yes.
Progress comes steady if you're preparing yourself for that and you're giving it the consideration of all aspects that you should. You must not let adversity, if you seem to be held up, bother you, because good things, and these are the ideas that I tried to get across, all good things come through adversity.
And yet most people try to avoid adversity.
Yes, and as someone said, when I look back, it seems to me all the grief that had to be left me when the pain was over, stronger than I was before. And I believe that. You get stronger physically through weights, adversity. You get stronger mentally through increasingly difficult subjects in school. You don't start out with calculus, you start out with arithmetic.
Yes.
And I think we get stronger morally and spiritually through adversity to some extent. So, and yet we do fear it. We don't want adversity, and yet that's what makes us better. We should learn from it, and we certainly should not fear it. You can't get stronger, say, in an athletic point of view if you constantly are playing inferior opponents. You may start playing to their level.
Yes.
You've got to be challenged to improve. Part of my job, I felt as a teacher, was to challenge the students under my supervision. And there's so many things that must be taken into consideration for that. You may be, I'm probably sure you're familiar with some of the things that Wilfred A. Peterson has written, and I picked up many years ago one on the art of living, and he has others, and I just recently received another one from him. And under leadership, he points out some things which I thought were true, but maybe didn't concentrate on them as much. For example, one that struck home very much is that the leader must always be concerned in finding the best way, not in having his own way. And another one was that the leader must make sure that all those under his supervision know that they're working with the leader, not for the leader.
Yes.
And I think you have to do that now. In my basketball teams at UCLA, they're not playing for me. I didn't want them to feel that, but we're all working together for a common cause. And it's up to the leader to get that across and not get lost in his importance. Then he becomes a dictator type, and that doesn't work out too well.
It seems to me that in reading some of the documents and talking to some of the people that you've coached, that you really coached with tremendous strength. You expected a tremendous amount from your players, but they all perceived that you cared very deeply for them, that you were a coach of love.
Well, the coach whose philosophy I admired was Amos Alonzo Stagg, and he once made the statement, he never had a player he didn't love. See, he had many he didn't like and didn't respect, but he loved them just the same. Well, in my early years of teaching, I would tell my players, I like you all the same, and I'm going to treat you all the same. Now, I never did. I was thinking that I was, but I wasn't. I didn't like them all the same. They didn't like me all the same. They didn't like each other all the same.
Right.
And yet I was saying that. And I never treated them all the same. I didn't want to show favoritism, but I think the surest way to show partiality and favoritism is to treat everybody alike. I think that's the surest way. I say, I'm going to try to give you the treatment you earn and deserve. And I have to make the judgment on that, and I know that I'm imperfect and I can be wrong, but if I am, I'm the one that's going to get caught up for it because this is my vocation. And if I don't do things properly, it'll be found out, and then I'll be somewhere else. So in many ways, it's little things like that that help you do well in the end more than the techniques of the game.
Yes. What do you think you contributed most to these players? Again, I know your humble approach is you don't take credit for things, but what did you really contribute to these players beyond the basketball field? On a basketball floor, rather.
I would say that I'm most proud of the fact that practically all my players got their degrees, and most all of them have done well in whatever professions they have chosen. I'm asked so much, aren't you proud of all your players that played professional basketball? I said, yes, I'm very proud of them, as well as I am of the 20-some that are attorneys and the 4 ministers and the number of dentists and the number of doctors and the teachers, and most of them, however, in business, because most of my players at UCLA majored in some sort of business. And while my 2 years at Indiana State, practically all my players became teachers and coaches.
Wow.
But not too many. A few at UCLA, but not nearly as many. So I'm very proud of them, and I'm more proud of that than I am, say, of championships. And if you would like, a little later, I'd like to play something for you that means more to me than any championship
Maybe we'll end with that. I'd love to hear that. Mm-hmm. What are some of the beliefs and values that you consciously really wanted to instill in these players that you thought would make a difference not only on the basketball floor, but again in their life?
Well, I tried to get across my definition of success to them, which I think is far more than just playing basketball. And my definition of success, which I coined in 1934, is peace of mind, which can be attained only through self-satisfaction in knowing that you made the effort to become the best that you're capable of becoming. Now, without peace of mind, I don't think anyone has very much. They're always looking for something else, and they don't see, the other side of the street always looks better.
Yes.
And they're so different. My favorite American is Abraham Lincoln. And he had that wonderful ability to say so much in just a few words. I think his immortal Gettysburg Address of some 268 words really says more than many volumes.
Yes.
But he said, it's better to trust and be disappointed once in a while than it is to distrust and be miserable all the time. And there's so much to that. And little statements like, the worst thing you can do for those you love are the things they could and should do for themselves. And I can go on and on with many, many statements of just simple statements which have so much depth to them. But I hoped that as far as my players are concerned, that they would think of me afterwards not as much as their basketball coach, but as more or less a friend, a teacher, one was really concerned about them as individuals more than just as basketball players. Not that I wasn't. Of course, they're there in all probability because of their basketball ability. But once they're there, I want them to know that I'm far more concerned than them as individuals than I am as just basketball players.
Well, that's clear to this day in hearing some of the interviews with these people. Tell me about when you first came to UCLA. Back, was it 1948, wasn't it?
That's correct.
If I recall correctly, you had 2 choices, UCLA and I think Minnesota.
That's correct.
And you'd chosen Minnesota, but an interesting experience of fate caused you to come to UCLA. Maybe you can share that.
Well, it was a snowstorm.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, at that particular time, Purdue was trying to get me to come back there very much, but they wanted me to stay at Indiana State for another year. And then they were going to let the coach go, and I didn't feel that was the right way to treat people. And I just decided I wouldn't be interested in Purdue. And Minnesota was also wanting me, and UCLA. And they had both offered me the positions, but there was a little hitch in Minnesota, in as much as they wanted me to keep as the assistant the coach that I was replacing. Now, they were not firing him. He wanted to be out, wanted to retire, but he still wanted to keep sort of a hand in it. And he was a fine man that I liked and enjoyed, but I just didn't feel that it would be best. I knew our philosophy of the game was different, and I didn't think it would be best. And they didn't have it in their budget for me to bring an assistant with me. So UCLA had offered me the job, and they wanted me to let them know by, I think it was 7 o'clock one evening in April. And Minnesota, they were to let me call at 6 o'clock to let me know whether or not that they had worked out in the budget. There was a Board of Regents meeting with the Director of Athletics, was going to be there with him. And he didn't call me at 6, and UCLA called at 7, and I accepted. And about 8, I got the call from Minnesota saying everything is all fine, and I said, well, I'm sorry, I've committed myself, and I can't back out on it. And the reason they didn't get the phone, there was a what they called an unseasonable, a late snowstorm. I'm not sure that a snowstorm in April in Minnesota is unseasonable or not.
Yeah,
but
that's
anyway,
right.
that was the reason that he couldn't get the phone. The lines were down, and that's. I would have gone to Minnesota had they called at 6 o'clock. That is true.
Well, I'd be curious about some of your beliefs about destiny, because I know that there are many experiences in your life like that. I know you were stationed or scheduled rather to go off to war in the South Pacific, and you got appendicitis, and as a result you didn't go, and the man who took your place was killed by a kamikaze pilot. I mean, there have been a series of experiences like that. I remember reading about one of your associates who later became an associate, Eddie Powell, who came to you. Maybe you could share that experience. But I'd be curious to know two things. Maybe you could share the story of Eddie Powell and what happened. But secondly, I'd like to know, what are some of your beliefs about destiny? Do you think there's a certain amount of this is predestined for you, or is it a matter of choices? Is it a combination of the two? What are your beliefs in that area?
Well, I'm not particularly a fatalist, but
Yes,
I do
good.
believe.
I'm not either.
I do believe that that there are things that I don't know how to explain it. It's been said, that we may not know where our paths may lead, but we know they're being directed in some way. And I sort of believe that. And things have happened that's been unusual. Now, Eddie Powell, I had Eddie and his wife as English students in high school, and then Eddie played for me on both basketball, baseball teams. He was a terrible basketball player, it seemed to me, practices and everything. And yet, on the other hand, his sophomore year, he was a fine baseball player. And his second baseman, he made the double play well, and he was a good hitter, and was just a fine clutch player. He was on the basketball team, but he didn't get to play. Maybe I kept him on the squad subconsciously because of the fact that I needed him in the spring on baseball. But we had one time when he was his junior year, and it was early in the season, but we were rated. There were three teams. They run ratings with the AP and UP in Indiana with high school teams, just like they do in the colleges. And there were three teams, or the top three, and they were ourselves and Fort Wayne Central and a team from Gary, Frabel of Gary. And it's by quirk of the schedule somehow, they weren't in our conference, and this was before we'd opened our conference. We played on consecutive nights. We played Frabel in Gary.
Oh, my gosh.
Then Fort Wayne Central, we played them in South Bend. And we had a tremendous game with Frabel of Gary, and I think we ended up by winning at 47-45. And Eddie, of course, didn't get in the game. He was on the bench, and he didn't get in the game because it was a tough game. I'm not going to put him in a game like that. We went to a restaurant to have something to eat before driving back to South Bend, and Eddie sat over by himself. And I went over and said, "Come on, Eddie." And I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "I might as well drop basketball. I'm not doing any good and never get to play." And I said, "Oh, Eddie, you must never give up. You never can tell what can happen. And if you're not enjoying it, that's one thing. But if you feel it's just because of lack of playing, that would be wrong." And he said, "Coach," he said, "I know if you'd let me play with Eddie and Jimmy and Bobby, and I know that if I could play with them, I could play well. I never get to play with them, and I know I could." And I said, "Eddie, have you ever shown in practices or games that you should be in there?" "No, but I know I could play if you'd put me in there." Well, I said, "Okay, Eddie, I'll play you tomorrow night against Fort Wayne Central." And boy, he lit up like this. And then on the drive back, I said to my wife, who always went with me, and I said, "Honey, I pulled another one, another mistake." And she said, "What'd you do this time, honey?" And I said, "Well, I told Eddie that I'd start him tomorrow night." And I said, "That's not right." He said, "He hasn't earned it, and he hasn't deserved it, and I made a mistake, and I must go through with it because I gave my word, and I must live up to it." I said I didn't tell him how long he'd played, though. So, but
you figured you put him in for a short time.
Yeah.
Huh?
So I thought to convince him that Fort Wayne Central had a player who later became an All-American player at Indiana University, and at that time was considered perhaps the best high school player in Indiana by the name of Armstrong. So I thought, he'll convince Eddie in a hurry. When I put Eddie defending him, I use the man-to-man defense, of course, always helping on the weak side. My man-to-man defense is practically zone weak side. It's just man-to-man on strong side. And, well, to shorten it up, he held Armstrong to the lowest number of points he'd ever scored. He scored more points for us than he'd ever scored in all the games he'd been in put together. He got a number of rebounds and just played a tremendous basketball game, and was selected as our most valuable player at the end of the season, and the next season, and started every game from that time on. And it was sort of odd that some of the reporters said after the Fort Wayne game, "Coach, you really were saving him for this game, were you?" It was just a farce in a way that happened to come about. And it makes you wonder, how many other young people have you missed because of something like that not happening? And I still say I made a mistake by telling him to do that, but I did tell him, and it was a good mistake, it turned out, because I found a great competitor in there and played extremely well. Never practiced well after that either, but always played well.
He got up for the games. He later became an assistant coach for you, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Came out here with me after he was in the Marine Corps for 5 years, and he came to Indiana State hoping to play, but he had developed varicose veins, and he just couldn't play, and he was I used him as a student assistant. I had no assistant, and I used him as student assistant because he's a very intelligent player. And then when I came to UCLA, he still hadn't graduated, and he came out here with me, and I used him as a student assistant here, and he got his degree from UCLA and is here, and I'll be attending their wedding anniversary in a couple of weeks.
Fantastic.
He and Henrietta, that were, they're sort of like Nellie and I never went with anyone but Nellie, and he never went with anyone but Henrietta, so they're very dear to us.
That's neat. You offered him the challenge. You said that's what makes people grow. You certainly gave it to him, and he met the challenge. When you first came out to UCLA, I know there were quite a few promises made to you. One was the place to play, which I guess you didn't get for almost 16 years. And you also came out to a team that I think you were, if I remember correctly, a little bit disappointed with the base of talent that you had to start with. They were, I think UCLA's team back in 1948 was selected to, or predicted to place last in the league. What happened that first year?
Well, Tony, correcting one thing that has probably been misrepresented. I know I've never said it, but they didn't promise me a place to play.
Oh, I see.
But they led me to believe that when my contract was up, that they were working on it, and there'd be a place to play by the time I'd finished my contract with them. So they didn't break a promise.
Oh, okay.
At all. I saw, though, before I'd been here too long, that it wasn't going to happen. Of course, it happened, my 17th year, I guess it was. But in seeing the talent when I had them, I thought, the team that I left at Indiana State, my team there, my first year I had 11 freshmen, one sophomore. Freshmen were eligible then because of just the war just being over. And so I had them all back the next year. Now I'm going to have them for 2 more years, and they were good. They're getting better all the time, and I thought they'd have taken this UCLA talent and trounced them.
Right.
But UCLA had some good players the year before, but they still hadn't done well. They'd had an outstanding player by the name of Don Barksdale, an All-American Olympic player, and they had Davidge Minor, who'd played in Indiana high school and beat us out of an important high school game one time, and I remembered him very well. And then they had George and John Stanich. John Stanich had graduated, but George was still there, and I had him. But the talent just didn't compare, actually. And I thought, it's going to be rough, but we had the best year that UCLA had ever had and won the conference, and that's one of the years that has given me the greatest personal satisfaction.
Well, how did you do that? How did you take this raw talent that didn't seem to be there and turn it into a championship team in 1 year?
I started a different style of ball that wasn't played too much on the coast, and I think it caught a lot of others by surprise a little bit. They hadn't used the fast break and been more or less ball control, and these players were conditioned to playing ball control basketball, and it seemed to me that they adapted very well to a different style, and that probably helped them tremendously. And maybe other schools were down a little bit. That I don't know. I hadn't seen them before, but I'm very proud of that particular group. I'm proud of any that won a national championship.
I know that you said many times that most basketball games are settled in the final 5 minutes, and that it's in those 5 minutes that you think you can win the games because the other guys are burnt out because you've pressed them all game long and you've run them all game long. And was that part of the strategy with your first teams?
Oh, absolutely. I took that, I think, probably from going way back to my college coach. And I felt that if you are in better condition, the only way to make it pay dividends is to keep pressure on constantly, both offensively and defensively. So we tried to do that. And not too many were doing that on the coast at that particular time. Not that they weren't well coached. It was just a different style. Mm-hmm. And I think that really is true, and I think that was true at the end of my coaching. Generally speaking, if the teams are comparatively evenly matched, the better conditioned team will probably prevail.
Well, they'll be in a mental and emotional state to be able to execute, basically, as a result
so.
of that. That's interesting. What were some of the key ingredients you were looking for in your players? I mean, what were some of the things that you really expected from them or demanded from them in terms of qualities? I'd be curious.
Well, I think from a physical point of view, the most important attribute that any player can have in any sport is quickness. But that quickness must be under control. If it isn't under control, you have a lot of activity, but you have little achievement. And
Yes.
I don't want activity without achievement, which is another statement that I often used. Now, to have your quickness under control, you have to be balanced, emotionally balanced, and mentally balanced. And so that's what you're working for. To have the physical balance, you have to be mentally balanced to know where your feet should be, where your head should be, where your hands should be, and how the joints should be relaxed, and all those things. That is something that I tried to concentrate on as much as possible. I think in life there's two words that are important: love and balance. Now maybe we just need the one, Tony. Maybe love would take care of everything. And I think it would. True love would. But you have to have balance. And balance is keeping things in perspective. Not letting yourself get too high, not letting yourself get too low, and keeping all areas of your life. Eating must be balanced. Rest must be balanced. Everything must be in balance. And that's what I'm trying to get across. So I'm looking for quickness and then hoping that I can help keep it in balance. Now, the next thing I'm looking for is teamwork.
Yes.
They must be concerned about the team more so than individual accomplishments. I try to point out that if the team does well, there's going to be credit for all. If the team doesn't do well, there's not going to be all that much credit. And you're all a part of the team. And so I'm trying to get that idea, and you try to point that out in different ways, like describing them as a machine, an automobile, a powerful automobile. Now, this player may be the engine.
Yes.
But how good is that engine if a wheel is missing?
Yes.
It isn't going to take you anywhere. And you may be just a wheel on this team. But you're no good if we don't have a nut holding that wheel on. And you may be just a nut that's holding the wheel on, but there's a role for you, and it's very important.
Yes.
Some are going to be more publicized and more in the public eye, but you're all important, very important. The role that you have is very important. And whether you players believe it or not, you need somebody in this car driving it. Because if you don't have me, you'll run in circles as sure as the world. So you need me a little bit. And that's just one way that I would try to point out the attaining. I used to use plays. You may have a leading character. If you don't have a good supporting cast, it won't be a play. It won't get many encores.
Yes.
We won't do well on the road. You've got to have the supporting cast. So everyone is important. So that's what I want. I want players with what you would call an unselfish attitude.
Yes.
That are concerned for the group as a whole. Now,
well, they didn't start out that way, some of them, though, did they? I mean, you're in a situation where you have a lot of players who had a fairly strong ego coming into your program. How did you deal with that?
A coach has the greatest ally in the world, Tony, the bench.
So pain is your ally.
If you're not afraid to use it, if you'll put them on the bench, they'll come around. I found that to be very true. One of the finest forwards I ever had, his first year, he sat on the bench most of the time when he's easily the best forward. And he'd say, "You know I'm better than those." I say, "Yes, I am. Too bad you're letting them beat you out." And until you think more in terms of the team or get your play. And he wasn't a selfish individual. He was just, that's the way he had always played and had been brought up that way. It's hard to break. But when he broke it the next 2 years, I thought he was the best forward in the country.
Wow.
But that 1 year, he sat on the bench and watched others most of the time.
The Tony Robbins podcast is directed and hosted by Tony Robbins and Mary Buckheit. Carrie Song is our executive producer. Strategy and distribution by Anna York and Tyler Culbertson. Jamie Carvajal and Adriel De La Torre are our digital editors. Copyright Robbins Research International.